The first escape pod exploded before it even cleared the station. Commander Elena Vargas didn't see the missile launch. She only saw the flash, bright, sudden, impossibly violent, blossoming across the black void outside the observation window. One moment the pod had been drifting away from New Horizon Station with 47 civilians inside. The next moment it was gone. Somewhere in the wreckage of that pod had been the Tanaka family. A father, a mother, and 2 sons under the age of 10. Elena had eaten dinner with them 3 weeks ago. The youngest boy had asked her what stars tasted like. The explosion painted the entire command deck in white light. For a fraction of a second, every face in the room looked frozen. Eyes wide, mouths open. The kind of stillness that only comes when the human mind refuses to process what it has just witnessed. Then the alarms began screaming. Missile impact confirmed, someone shouted from the back of the deck. The station lurched violently as the shockwave struck its outer hull. Consoles flickered. Several officers grabbed their stations to keep from falling. The floor groaned beneath them like something alive and in pain. Elena forced herself to breathe. "Report," she said. Her voice came out calm. She didn't know how. Lieutenant Kade Ishikawa turned from the tactical display. His face had gone completely pale. The kind of pale that doesn't come from cold. "That wasn't debris," he said quietly. Elena already knew. The main screen shifted to an external feed. The camera zoomed toward the growing cloud of burning fragments where the escape pod had been seconds earlier. Tiny pieces of metal drifted outward, glowing red from the blast. Rotating slowly, cooling into the dark. 47 people had been inside that pod. Families, scientists, children. None of them were alive anymore. Before anyone on the command deck could speak, the tactical display changed. New icons appeared. Then more. Then dozens. Red markers. Too many of them. Multiple hostile vessels, the sensor officer said, her voice barely holding together. "They're surrounding the station." Elena stared at the screen. 27 ships. All warships. They had arrived only minutes ago, dropping out of hyperspace like silent predators. The station's long-range sensors hadn't even seen them coming. And now they were methodically destroying every escape pod that tried to leave. Pod 3 vanished. Then Pod 4. Each one carrying dozens of people. Each one erased in a burst of fire that lasted less than a second. Elena turned briefly toward the secondary display on the left wall, the one that showed the station's population registry. Names scrolled endlessly down the list. Engineers, researchers, doctors, teachers, children. Her eyes stopped on one name before she could stop them. Sofia Vargas. Age 9. Location, residential sector C. Her daughter should have been in school right now. The station's education wing ran classes every morning, and Sofia never missed one. She loved learning about alien biology. Last week, she had excitedly explained how the plants on EOS 7 communicated through chemical signals in their roots, holding up a small drawing she had made during class to illustrate the process. Elena had barely understood half of it, but she had listened anyway, because Sofia's eyes had been shining the entire time she talked. Elena looked away from the registry. She couldn't afford that thought right now. "Why are they targeting the pods?" someone whispered. Elena didn't answer, because she already knew the truth. This wasn't an attack meant to conquer the station. It was something else, something colder. The communications console chimed. "Commander," the comm officer said carefully. "Incoming transmission. From the fleet. Put it on screen." The command deck lights dimmed automatically as the main display shifted. A face appeared. It was not human. Dark-scaled skin covered the creature's skull like armored plates. Its eyes were narrow and yellow, reptilian and absolutely cold. Behind it stretched the bridge of a massive alien warship, its officers moving between tall holographic consoles in silence. Through the viewport beyond them, the burning remains of another escape pod drifted like a dying ember. The creature studied the humans on the screen as though they were insects pinned to a board. Something curious, something small. Then it spoke. Its voice sounded like gravel grinding against steel. "Attention, human outpost." Elena felt the room grow colder. "I am War Commander Varex of the Draxian Imperium." Another escape pod exploded silently in space behind him. He didn't turn to look at it. He already knew it would happen. "You are trespassing in territory now claimed by the Imperium." The creature's yellow eyes narrowed slightly. "You have 40 minutes to evacuate." Another missile streaked across the void. Another pod died. Varex tilted his head slightly, almost curious, the way someone might tilt their head watching something interesting fall. "Run if you wish," he said calmly. "It will not help." Commander Elena Vargas did not answer him immediately. She let the silence stretch for several seconds, the image of War Commander Varex still looming across the main display. Behind him, the dark bridge of the alien warship pulsed with cold blue lights. 40 minutes. "Mute the transmission," she ordered. The communications officer obeyed instantly. Varex's scaled face disappeared, replaced by the tactical display. It was worse than she had feared. 27 enemy warships had formed a loose perimeter around New Horizons Station, their formation blocking every major escape vector. And they were still firing. Another red flash appeared. Pod 7 destroyed. The command deck erupted into overlapping voices. "They're targeting the escape trajectories. Defensive platforms aren't responding. Missile batteries offline." Elena raised a hand. "Quiet." The room obeyed. For the first time since the attack began, she allowed herself to really look at the station's schematic rotating on the display. New Horizons Station was never meant to survive a battle. It had been built 22 years earlier as a scientific outpost orbiting the small blue world of Eos 7, a quiet planet rich in rare mineral deposits and strange alien plant life. The station had three primary functions: research, mining coordination, and civilian habitation. Most of its population weren't soldiers. They were scientists studying alien ecosystems, engineers maintaining the mining infrastructure, medical staff, teachers, and the families who had followed them out to the edge of human space. 832 people called New Horizon home. Over 100 of them were children. A frontier station wasn't just a workplace. It was a community. Birthdays were celebrated together. Holidays were shared. When someone got sick, everyone knew about it within hours. You learned the sound of every child laughing in the residential corridors. You learned their parents' faces. You learned their names. Which meant Elena knew exactly who had been inside every one of those burning pods. "Status of evacuation," she said. Lieutenant Cade checked his console. 23 pods launched so far. A pause. Only 9 have made it past the perimeter. The number hit the room like a physical blow. 14 pods destroyed. Nearly 700 people still trapped aboard the station. And somewhere in Residential Sector C, a 9-year-old girl who loved alien plant biology was waiting to be told what to do. Elena turned toward the large observation window. From this distance, New Horizons Station still looked almost peaceful. Its massive rotating habitat ring spun slowly against the stars, simulating gravity for the residential sectors. Docking arms extended outward like metal branches. It had once been beautiful. Now it was surrounded by enemy warships. Another explosion lit the darkness. Pod 10 vanished. The Draxians weren't trying to stop an evacuation. They were making sure there were no survivors. "Incoming transmission again," the comm officer said. "Alien flagship." Elena straightened. "Put him through." War Commander Varex returned to the screen. This time he was smiling. "You are wasting valuable time, Commander," the alien said calmly. He gestured toward one of his officers without looking away from the camera. "Destroy the next pod." Another missile. Another explosion. Varex turned his attention back to Elena. "You see? You cannot escape." Elena stared back at him. "Why are you doing this?" The alien seemed almost amused by the question. "Because your species needs to learn something." The smile widened slightly. He leaned closer to the camera. "Human lives have no value out here." His yellow eyes were perfectly still. "And today, we are going to prove it." The transmission ended. Behind Elena, the evacuation alarms continued screaming through the station corridors. And somewhere deep inside the residential sector, her daughter was still there. In the residential corridors, people were running. Scientists still wearing lab coats rushed down the hallways clutching data drives. Parents carried children in their arms. Teachers tried to keep groups of terrified students together, counting heads, shouting names into the chaos. Emergency lights bathed everything in deep red. The air smelled of smoke and fear and something chemical from a ruptured pipe somewhere nearby. A small girl with dark hair clutched a stuffed animal as she was pushed along by the surge of bodies. Sofia Vargas was 9 years old, and she didn't understand what was happening. She only knew the alarms meant danger, and that her mother had told her once, very seriously, that if the alarms ever made that sound, she had to run to the nearest escape pod bay and get inside. Her mother had said it the way adults said things they hoped they would never have to say. Sophia had nodded and hoped the same thing. Move, move, someone shouted ahead of her. A bulkhead door slid open. Beyond it lay the escape pod bay. Rows of silver pods lined the walls like metal seeds waiting for the dark. A hand grabbed Sophia's arm to steady her as she stumbled. She looked up. Dr. Ethan Walker, a xenobotanist who had once shown her glowing alien flowers from the planet below, holding each one up against the lab light so she could see the veins running through the petals. He had an easy smile and patient hands, and he always explained things twice if she asked. "Stay with me," he said. She nodded, frightened. Crew members were shouting instructions at the entrance to the bay. 40 per pod. Move quickly. Children first. Dr. Walker lifted Sophia into one of the pods, guiding her gently to a seat near the center where the padding was thicker. "Stay here," he said. "Are you coming too?" she asked. He hesitated, just for a second, but she saw it. "I have to help more people first." The hatch began closing. Sophia grabbed his sleeve. "My mom said she'd meet me." Dr. Walker forced a reassuring smile, the kind adults wear when they are terrified and trying not to show it. "She will," he said. The hatch sealed. Seconds later, the pod launched. Back on the command deck, Elena watched the tactical display as Pod 30 broke away from the station. For a moment, nothing happened. No missiles. No explosions. Hope flickered in the room like a candle in wind. "Maybe they missed it," someone whispered. Then a Draxian cruiser rotated slowly. Its weapons glowed. A missile launched. The pod vanished. Hope died with it. More impacts rocked the station. The deck tilted violently. "Hull breach in Sector D," someone shouted. Atmosphere venting. The station lights flickered again. Smoke began filling parts of the command deck. The Draxians had stopped hunting only the pods. They were beginning to fire on the station itself. "Commander!" Cade shouted suddenly. Elena turned. One blue icon was still moving on the tactical display. Pod 37. It had launched at a strange angle, drifting behind a large chunk of debris from a destroyed cargo ship. The wreckage was partially hiding it from alien sensors. "It's slipping through their formation," Cade said. Missiles streaked past the debris cloud, searching, but the pod was small, hard to detect in the darkness between burning wreckage. For several seconds, no one on the command deck breathed. The tiny blue icon kept moving. Slowly, steadily. Then it vanished from the map. Not destroyed. Gone. The pod had activated its FTL drive. Cade exhaled slowly. One pod made it. 47 people. Out of more than 800. The fragile moment of relief lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then a Draxian missile struck the station's main reactor ring. The explosion tore through the central structure like a blade. The command deck lurched violently. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The main display shattered. The floor buckled. Elena was thrown backward as metal screamed around her, and the world tilted past vertical and kept going. Then everything went black. When Elena regained consciousness, there were no alarms. No voices. No command deck. Only silence. She was floating in open space. Her emergency suit had deployed automatically, its transparent visor showing her a view she would carry for the rest of her life. Below her, New Horizon Station was no longer a station. It was a shattered ring of burning metal drifting through the stars. Support structures jutted outward like broken ribs. The habitat ring that had spun so peacefully for 22 years was cracked open to the void, its contents scattered across kilometers of darkness. Draxian warships circled the wreckage slowly, methodically, the way predators circle something they are certain is already dead. Elena activated her communicator. Static filled her helmet. Then a faint voice emerged from somewhere in the darkness. "Any survivors, this is Escape Pod 37. Please respond." Elena closed her eyes. At least someone had lived. But behind her, the wreckage of New Horizon Station burned quietly in the darkness. And 800 human lives had ended in less than an hour. Pod 37 drifted through deep space for nearly 2 days before its engines finally died. Inside the small capsule, 47 survivors sat in near silence. Some were injured. Makeshift bandages wrapped around arms and foreheads. Some were crying quietly, the kind of crying that comes after shock has passed and reality has moved in to take its place. Some simply stared at the cold metal walls as if their minds had decided to go somewhere else entirely. Dr. Ethan Walker sat strapped into one of the seats near the front of the pod. He had gone back 3 more times into the evacuation corridors before the launch. He didn't talk about what he had seen. Beside him sat Sofia Vargas, still clutching her stuffed animal. She had not spoken much since the launch. Every few minutes, she asked the same quiet question, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is my mom coming?" Dr. Walker never knew what to say, so he would squeeze her hand gently and say, "We're going to get help." She would nod, and then a few minutes later she would ask again. Outside the pod, the stars stretched endlessly in every direction, and far behind them, the wreckage of New Horizons Station slowly faded into the dark. 3 days later, the pod reached human space. Earth Command had already detected the emergency distress beacon hours earlier. By the time the capsule drifted into orbit around Earth, dozens of rescue ships were waiting. Medical teams pulled the survivors out one by one. Some were unconscious. Some collapsed the moment their feet touched solid ground. Others simply stared in stunned silence as they were guided into waiting transport shuttles. Sophia was carried down the ramp, wrapped in a thermal blanket. Her eyes were red from days of crying. A nurse gently asked her name. "Sofia Vargas," she whispered. The nurse froze. Several people nearby exchanged looks. The name was passed up the chain of command within minutes. Because everyone who had heard the emergency transmissions from New Horizon already knew that name. Commander Elena Vargas. The officer who had stayed on the command deck while the station burned. Whose last transmission had been 3 words. "Run. Tell Earth." The news spread across human space in less than an hour. At first it was only fragments. A destroyed station. Hundreds dead. A surviving escape pod. Then the full story began to emerge. Emergency recordings from Pod 37 were transmitted to Earth Command. Sensor data. Audio logs. Fragments of video captured during the evacuation. Every piece of it told the same story. The Draxian fleet had not attacked a military target. They had attacked a civilian research station. They had destroyed escape pods full of families. They had broadcast the massacre across open channels. And they had done it deliberately, methodically, without hesitation. The footage reached the Terran Council that same evening. 200 representatives sat in the circular chamber as the recording began playing on the central screen. The room was absolutely silent. On the screen, the interior of an escape pod shook violently. People were screaming. A child's voice could be heard crying somewhere in the background. Then the camera captured the moment an escape pod visible through the porthole ahead of them exploded. Several council members turned away. Others stared at the screen in disbelief. The video ended with a small voice asking a question from somewhere in the darkness of the pod. "Why are they shooting us?" No one in the chamber spoke. Across human space, the story spread like fire through dry grass. News networks replayed the footage constantly. Images of the destroyed pods. Audio from the evacuation. The final transmission from Commander Elena Vargas. Shock slowly turned into anger. Then anger turned into something colder. Something heavier. Something that had no clean name. In the Terran Defense Fleet headquarters, orbiting Earth, Admiral Daniel Rourke stood alone in his office. The large window behind him revealed the blue curve of Earth glowing beneath the station. On his desk lay a datapad containing the casualty report. New Horizon Station population, 832. Confirmed survivors, 47. Estimated dead, 785. Among the names listed under the survivors was one that had already appeared on every news broadcast. Sofia Vargas. Age 9. Daughter of Commander Elena Vargas. Rourke stared at the list for a long time. Then the door behind him opened. Commander Leah Chin stepped inside. "The Council is requesting your presence, Admiral," she said quietly. "They want to discuss a response." Rourke did not turn around. "What kind of response?" Chin hesitated. "Sanctions. Diplomatic protest. Possibly a hearing before the Galactic Council." Rourke finally turned. His face was expressionless. "They murdered 785 civilians." "Yes, sir." "They destroyed escape pods full of families." "Yes, sir." "And the Council wants to write letters." Chin did not answer, because they both knew the truth. For decades, humanity had followed the rules of interstellar diplomacy. Disputes were settled through negotiations. Conflicts were taken before the Galactic Council. Military retaliation was considered a last resort reserved for last resorts. But something about New Horizon felt different. Something about the footage had moved through humanity like a current through water, and when it came out the other side, it had changed the temperature of everything. Rourke picked up the datapad. He scrolled through the names slowly. Scientists, teachers, children. Then he set the pad back down. Prepare a fleet readiness report, he said. Shin blinked. Sir, every ship, every weapon system. I want to know exactly what we have available. She studied him for a moment. Then she nodded. Yes, Admiral. She turned to leave. But before she reached the door, Rourke spoke again. Commander. She paused. When that little girl asked why they were shooting the escape pods, he looked out at Earth again. I don't have an answer for her. His voice hardened almost imperceptibly. But I intend to make sure the Draxians regret giving us the question. Outside the window, the planet continued turning slowly beneath the stars. The emergency session of the Terran Council lasted less than 2 hours. It should have taken days. Normally, every major decision required endless debate, committees, advisors, legal interpretations, diplomatic projections. Humanity had built an entire system designed to slow down dangerous choices. But this time the chamber was different. The usual noise was gone. Secretary General Malik Okoye finally stood. For 73 years, he said quietly, humanity has followed the laws of the Galactic Charter. We have honored its rules, respected its borders, and resolved our conflicts through diplomacy. He paused. And yesterday, 785 of our people were murdered. A representative from the Pacific Coalition rose to his feet. We should present this evidence to the Galactic Council. Demand sanctions against the Draxian Imperium. The Charter forbids attacks on civilian colonies. If the Council enforces its own laws. Admiral Daniel Rourke stood. He had not been invited to speak. But when he rose, the room fell quiet immediately. 40 years in the Terran Defense Fleet had made his reputation impossible to ignore. Sanctions, he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes from somewhere below anger. They destroyed escape pods. They targeted civilians deliberately. They broadcast the massacre across open channels. He gestured toward the dark screen. And we're going to respond with paperwork. The Pacific Coalition representative frowned. What alternative do you suggest, Admiral? Rourke looked around the chamber. At every seat. Every face. Consequences, he said. The word landed heavily. A representative from the European Union leaned forward. You're suggesting military retaliation. I'm suggesting we stop pretending this is a misunderstanding. Rourke tapped the datapad in his hand. The Draxians wanted to send a message. They succeeded. Secretary General Okoye folded his hands. And what message did they send, Admiral? The answer came without hesitation. That human lives are expendable. A long silence followed. Then Representative Lena Alvarez from the Martian Assembly stood. And what message would you send back? Rourke's eyes moved to the central screen where the last frame of the recording still lingered. A destroyed escape pod drifting through space. A child's question hanging in the air above the council chamber like smoke. That attacking humanity has a price. The room shifted uneasily, because everyone understood what that meant. 3 hours later, the order went out across the Terran Defense Fleet. Full mobilization. Ships that had been on patrol turned toward Earth. Training squadrons were recalled. Carrier groups deployed from hidden defense stations across the solar system. The message spread outward through human space, from Mars, from Titan, from distant colonies orbiting stars dozens of light years away. Every warship received the same command. Return to Earth. Prepare for operation briefing. Within days, the largest fleet assembly in human history began forming above the planet. Destroyers arrived first, then cruisers, then the massive carrier vessels that served as mobile command platforms. One by one, they dropped out of hyperspace and took their assigned positions in orbit. The number kept growing. 30 ships, 50, 100. Each one bristling with weapons designed for wars humanity had hoped it would never fight. The Galactic Council noticed immediately. Diplomatic channels flooded Earth with urgent messages. Requests for explanation. Requests for restraint. Threats of sanctions. None of them received an answer. Because humanity had already made its decision. 7 days after New Horizon was destroyed, Admiral Rourke stood on the command deck of the flagship Resolute. The enormous warship hung at the center of the growing fleet. Outside the viewing port, hundreds of Terran vessels filled the darkness like a field of steel stars. Commander Leah Chen approached quietly. Fleet assembly is almost complete. She checked her console. 186 ships so far. More still arriving. Rourke nodded slowly. Sir, Chen said carefully. What happens when we reach their territory? Rourke looked out at the fleet for a moment. Men and women were aboard every one of those ships. Pilots, engineers, Marines. Thousands of people preparing for something none of them truly wanted. But they had volunteered anyway, because they had all seen the footage. We asked them one question, he said. What question? Are they willing to face justice for New Horizon? And if they refuse? Outside the viewport, another Terran battleship dropped out of hyperspace to join the formation, its running lights steady in the dark. Then we make sure they never destroy another escape pod again. The Terran fleet departed Earth 12 days after the destruction of New Horizon Station. No speeches were made. No celebrations were held. 200 warships simply turned toward deep space and accelerated together into the dark. From the surface of Earth, the launch looked like a silent migration of stars. Families watched the sky in quiet streets. News broadcasts followed every ship as it vanished into hyperspace. Across human space, people understood that something irreversible had begun. The journey to Draxian territory took 3 weeks. On the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Rourke studied the tactical display as another message arrived from the Galactic Council. Commander Chen read it aloud. They're calling this escalation dangerous. They say it could destabilize half the frontier. Rourke looked at her. Did they say anything about the escape pods? Chen hesitated. No. Then ignore it. The message was archived without reply. On the 13th day, Commander Chen found Rourke alone on the observation deck. He stood looking out at the endless field of stars beyond the fleet, the way a man stands when he is having a conversation with himself that he hasn't finished yet. Sleep still avoiding you? She asked. He gave a small smile. Something like that. She leaned against the railing beside him. Do you ever wonder if the council was right? About diplomacy? He watched the distant ships for a moment before answering. If the Draxians had attacked a warship, he said, we could have negotiated. But they didn't. No. They destroyed escape pods. Chen nodded slowly. That's what I keep thinking about too. They stood there in silence for a while. Behind them, 200 warships continued their long journey through the dark. And ahead of them, something was waiting. On the 18th day, long-range sensors detected the first signs of Draxian territory. Massive energy signatures appeared on the tactical displays. Commander Chen studied the data, her expression tightening with each passing second. They're waiting for us. How many? Rourke asked. She looked up from the console. Rough estimate, for 1,000 vessels. The bridge grew very quiet. The Terran fleet numbered just over 200 ships. Chen looked at him carefully. Those are terrible odds. Rourke nodded once. Yes. Admiral, our people. They signed up for a battle. Not. I know, he said quietly. Then he straightened. Send the message. Chen blinked. What message? Open a broadcast channel to the entire Draxian fleet. Moments later the signal went out. Every ship in the enemy armada received the same transmission. Admiral Daniel Rourke stood at the center of the bridge. This is the Terran Defense Fleet, he said. His voice echoed across thousands of enemy ships. You destroyed a civilian station. You murdered hundreds of innocent people. He paused, letting that weight sit in the silence. We are here for one reason. Surrender the officers responsible for the New Horizon massacre. Silence followed. Then the Draxian fleet began moving. Thousands of warships surged forward like a metal storm, their weapons systems igniting across the darkness in a wall of cold fire. Commander Chen looked at the admiral. I guess that's their answer. Rourke nodded. He looked at the bridge crew, every face watching him, every hand steady on their station. All ships, he said calmly. Battle stations. Across 200 Terran vessels, alarms began to sound. The Draxian fleet came forward like a moving wall. Thousands of warships advanced in tight formation, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that had conquered dozens of species over centuries. The tactical display on the bridge of the Resolute filled with red markers until nearly the entire screen glowed crimson. 200 blue icons faced them. Chen studied the numbers. Standard Draxian doctrine, she said. Overwhelming frontal assault. They'll try to crush us with numbers. Rourke leaned forward slightly. Which is exactly what we want. Several officers exchanged quick glances. Tactical, he said. Signal the fleet. Formation echo. Across 200 Terran ships, new instructions flashed across command consoles. The Terran formation broke apart. Instead of staying together as a single block, the fleet split into multiple smaller groups that scattered across the battlefield in every direction. To the Draxians, it looked like panic. Their ships accelerated. Thousands of engines ignited simultaneously, turning the darkness into a burning sea of light as the massive armada surged toward the scattered human fleet. They believed the humans were retreating. They believed the smaller fleet would break under the pressure. They believed the battle was already won. Range? Rourke asked. 50,000 kilometers. 40. 35. Chen glanced toward him. Admiral, he watched the display for another moment. The red wall of icons filling every corner of the screen. The distance shrinking between two civilizations that had passed the point where words would work. Then he spoke quietly. Now, the Terran fleet opened fire. 200 warships unleashed everything they had been holding back. Railgun batteries fired first. Massive tungsten rounds accelerated to incredible speeds tore across space like invisible spears. The projectiles struck the leading edge of the Draxian fleet before their sensors even registered the launch. Entire cruisers were punched apart instantly. Armor shattered. Hull sections exploded outward into space. A second wave followed. Plasma lances erupted from Terran destroyers, cutting through enemy ships with surgical precision. Then the torpedoes arrived, quantum warheads streaking into the dense enemy formation before detonating in blinding flashes. In less than 30 seconds, the Draxian fleet lost over 200 ships. On the bridge of the Resolute, Chun stared at the tactical display. They weren't expecting that. The red formation staggered. Confusion rippled through the enemy armada. But the Draxians didn't stop. 4,000 ships kept coming. The void between the fleets filled with incoming fire. Point defense systems worked constantly, shredding incoming plasma bolts before they found their targets. Some got through. The Resolute shuddered as a hit punched through its forward shields. Another Terran destroyer vanished from the display. Then another. Then a third. 3 ships lost, Chen reported. 12 damaged. The Terran fleet kept moving. Each small group of ships wove through the gaps forming in the Draxian lines, targeting vulnerable vessels before vanishing again into the chaos of wreckage and fire. Instead of facing the massive armada head-on, they moved through it like water through rock, finding the cracks, widening them, letting the enormous weight of the enemy formation work against itself. Ships collided in the confusion. Orders conflicted. Entire formations broke apart as the command structure the Draxians relied on began coming apart under the assault. And the Terrans kept striking. Hours passed. The battle spread across millions of kilometers of space. Wreckage drifted everywhere. Draxian ships continued pouring forward, but they were disorganized now, responding to dozens of different threats from dozens of different directions with no unified answer to any of them. Chen watched the casualty reports scroll across her screen. Enemy losses approaching 800 vessels. Terran losses? She paused before answering. 22 ships destroyed. 31 heavily damaged. The numbers were terrible. The names behind them worse. But the battle was turning. On the Draxian flagship, War Commander Verex stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His fleet had outnumbered the humans 20-1. His empire had never lost a battle it had chosen to fight. For 3 centuries, species across the frontier had folded when they saw Draxian warships. They had surrendered. They had submitted. They had learned that resistance cost more than compliance. But the humans had not read those terms. How are they doing this? One of his officers demanded. Verex watched another cluster of his ships come apart on the display. He understood now. The scattered formation he had mistaken for panic had been a trap. The humans had drawn his fleet forward, broken its coherence, and were now dismantling it section by section. He slammed his clawed hand against the console. The humans weren't diplomats. They weren't explorers. They weren't the cautious, rules-following species he had spent 20 years studying. He had made a mistake. A fundamental one. He had confused patience for weakness. Back on the Resolute, Chen looked at the updated battlefield map. Enemy formation collapsing across 3 sectors. Rourke stood. Signal the fleet. 200 Terran ships regrouped, converging toward the center of the shattered Draxian armada. What had been scattered moments ago moved now as a single fist. Target the command ships, Rourke ordered. The next volley of railgun fire tore through the heart of the enemy fleet. The Draxian flagship shuddered as 2 Terran rounds punched through its shields and carved through its hull. On his bridge, Varex gripped the edge of his command console. Damage reports flooded every screen. His fleet was broken. His strategy had failed. And a human warship was now passing directly alongside his flagship, close enough that he could see the light from its weapons ports through his viewport. He waited for the end. But the destroyer didn't fire. Instead, a transmission appeared on his console. "Admiral Daniel Rourke, you remember the escape pods," the human said. His voice carried no rage, no triumph, just a steady, factual weight that was somehow worse than either. Varex's yellow eyes narrowed. "You watched them explode," Rourke continued. "One by one. You ordered it, and you watched it, and you called it a lesson." He leaned slightly toward the camera. "Now you get to watch your fleet die." The transmission ended. Outside the viewport, the Terran fleet began its final movement. The battle ended 12 hours after it began. What remained of the Draxian armada was scattered across the system in burning fragments. Thousands of wrecks drifted silently through space. Twisted metal hulls, shattered weapon platforms, broken ships venting their last atmosphere into the void. On the tactical display aboard the Resolute, the red markers that had once filled the screen were nearly gone. Chen studied the numbers. Enemy fleet neutralized. Approximately 800 vessels remain operational. "Retreating?" Rourke asked. "No, sir." She zoomed the display toward the nearby planet. Krellis Prime, the Draxian homeworld. The surviving ships had pulled back toward the planet's defensive perimeter. Orbital platforms were activating one by one, forming a ring of burning metal around the world. They were preparing for a final stand. Rourke stood at the front of the bridge, watching Krellis Prime rotate slowly beneath them. It was a beautiful world. Blue oceans, vast green continents, clouds swirling across the atmosphere. A civilization had grown there for thousands of years. Long-range scans confirmed billions of civilians on the surface, Chen said quietly. Rourke nodded. He was quiet for a moment. "Open a channel." The transmission went out across the entire planet. Every receiver, every military base, every government network. "This is Admiral Daniel Rourke of the Terran Defense Fleet," he said. "You attacked a civilian research station. You destroyed escape pods filled with families. You murdered 785 human beings. Below them, cities continued moving beneath the clouds. We are offering you one chance. Surrender the officers responsible for the New Horizon massacre, specifically War Commander Varex and every senior officer who participated in the attack. You have 2 hours." The response arrived 37 minutes later. A Draxian High Council official appeared on the main screen, surrounded by several other officials. Their expressions were carefully composed, but something behind the eyes was not. "Admiral Rourke," the counselor began, "the destruction of New Horizon Station was an unauthorized military action. We regret the loss of life and are willing to discuss reparations." Rourke's expression didn't change. "This is not a negotiation. You demanded justice," the counselor replied carefully. "Justice can take many forms." "You have 90 minutes left," Rourke said. The transmission ended. With 20 minutes remaining in the ultimatum, a single Draxian warship approached the Terran fleet slowly. Its hull was scarred from the battle. A transmission request appeared on the communications console. The image of War Commander Varex filled the screen. He looked very different now. The arrogance was gone. What remained was something older and more honest. "Admiral Rourke," he said. Rourke studied him. "You survived." Varex inclined his head slightly. "I take responsibility for the attack on your station." He paused. "My government fears you intend to destroy our world. If justice is what you seek, I will surrender myself. Spare my people." The bridge went quiet. Rourke was silent for a long moment. "You destroyed escape pods," he finally said. "Yes." "You gave them 40 minutes to evacuate." "Yes." "And then you killed them anyway." Varex did not answer. There was no answer that would help. Rourke stepped closer to the screen. "You wanted the galaxy to see what happens when someone defies the Draxian Imperium. You broadcast the massacre. You made sure every species in this quadrant was watching." Varex's yellow eyes were very still. "Yes." Rourke nodded once. "Then the galaxy will also see what happens when someone murders human civilians." He turned toward the bridge crew. "Broadcast evacuation warning. Every Terran ship began transmitting the same message to the planet below. Attention citizens of Krellis Prime. You have 24 hours to evacuate. Any civilian vessel attempting to leave the planet will not be targeted. After 24 hours, orbital bombardment of all military infrastructure will begin. Varix stared at the screen. You would destroy an entire world? Rourke met his gaze and held it. You destroyed escape pods full of children. The transmission ended. Below them, panic spread across Krellis Prime as billions of civilians received a warning that their world had just entered the last day of the civilization they had always known. 24 hours later, the bombardment began. Evacuation ships had been streaming away from the planet's surface since the moment the warning went out. Millions had escaped. Hundreds of millions had not. Some could not. Some would not. Some did not believe it was real until it was. The Terran fleet did not fire on any of them. Every civilian vessel that climbed through the atmosphere was allowed to pass unmolested through the fleet's formation. Rourke had been clear about that from the beginning. He had given that order before the ultimatum was even broadcast. But the military infrastructure of the Draxian Imperium was a different matter. Kinetic rods struck first, dense tungsten projectiles plunging through the atmosphere. Military bases vanished in expanding shockwaves. Shipyards along the coastlines shattered into molten craters. Weapons depots and command bunkers disappeared beneath storms of fire. The carefully built war machine of the Draxian Imperium collapsed piece by piece, facility by facility, across the length and breadth of the world that had built it. On the bridge of the Resolute, the damage reports scrolled across Chin's console in a steady stream. She read them without speaking. Rourke stood at the observation window, watching the surface of Krellis Prime through a haze of smoke and fire. He had told himself this was justice. He had told himself this was consequence. He had told himself that the Draxians had chosen this when they chose to make an example of 832 people who had done nothing to deserve it. He still believed all of that. It didn't make the watching easier. Finally, Chin spoke. Admiral, there are no remaining military targets. Rourke nodded slowly. Cease fire. Across the fleet, weapon systems powered down. Below them, Krellis Prime was no longer the jewel of the Imperium. Smoke filled its atmosphere. The coasts where its shipyards had been were broken and black. The world was not dead, but the civilization that had ordered the destruction of New Horizon Station, the empire that had believed human lives had no value out here, that was finished. Rourke opened a final transmission. The signal reached every surviving Draxian ship still fleeing the system. You wanted the galaxy to see your power, he said. You broadcast the destruction of a human station to prove no one could challenge your empire. Behind him, the ruined planet turned slowly beneath the fleet. This is our response. He paused. The civilians who escaped your world will be given asylum in human territory. They will be fed, protected, and allowed to rebuild their lives. His voice hardened. But the Imperium that murdered our people is finished. The transmission ended. Moments later, the Terran fleet began turning away from the ruined world. 200 ships, fewer than had arrived, moving in formation back through the dark. The galaxy reacted quickly. The Galactic Council met in emergency session, arguing for weeks over what humanity had done. Some governments called the destruction of Krellis Prime an unforgivable atrocity. Others quietly admitted that the Draxians had chosen this path the moment they targeted escape pods full of children and broadcast the footage with pride. Sanctions were proposed. None passed. No one was eager to make an enemy of the species that had just answered a massacre with an armada. Across dozens of star systems once ruled by the Imperium, civilizations that had lived under Draxian control for generations found themselves suddenly, strangely free. Some sent messages to Earth. Some simply stayed silent, too stunned to know yet what freedom felt like. The balance of power in the galaxy had changed overnight. Months later, Sophia Vargas stood in a quiet garden overlooking the Pacific Ocean on Earth. She was still small for her age, and the loss of her mother had left shadows behind her eyes that no 9-year-old should carry. She had been told what happened to Commander Elena Vargas. Told as gently as the truth allows, which is to say not gently enough. She had cried for 3 days. Then she had stopped crying and started asking questions instead, the way her mother always had. Beside her stood Admiral Rourke. They both looked out across the water. The ocean moved the way it always had, indifferent to everything that had happened in the stars above it. Sophia watched a wave come in and flatten against the sand. "Is it over?" she finally asked. Rourke nodded slowly. "Yes." She thought about that. "They won't hurt anyone else." "No." She held her stuffed animal a little tighter. "My mom said Earth would come. She said it the way children say things they need to be true." Rourke felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders like something physical. "She was right," he said. Sophia was quiet for a moment. The ocean moved. A bird called somewhere in the distance. "Did we win?" Rourke looked out at the horizon. The question sat in the air between them. He thought about the tactical display filling with red markers. About the names on the casualty report he had read so many times he no longer needed the datapad to see them. About a ruined planet turning beneath a fleet that had come to deliver justice and had stayed to deliver something more complicated than that. He thought about whether justice and winning were the same thing. He thought about what Elena Vargas would have said if she had been standing here instead of him. He didn't have a clean answer. He wasn't sure one existed. "We made sure no one forgets what happened," he said finally. Sophia nodded slowly. She looked back at the ocean. The wave had gone out. Another one was coming. Far away, in the ruins of Krellis Prime, a simple monument would eventually be placed by the Terran Defense Fleet. Its message carved into stone and steel, translated into every known galactic language. Not as a celebration, as a warning. Never mistake humanity's patience for weakness. If you destroy our homes, we will end yours.